You're listening to Radio VR, the voice of Russia in London, with me, Juliet Spare. An Amnesty International policy document criticising the criminalisation of the buying or selling of sex has been discovered and leaked. The paper, which is called Decriminalisation of Sex Work Policy Background Document, states that Amnesty International is opposed to the criminalisation or punishment of activities related to the buying or selling of consensual sex between adults. Laws against prostitution undermine the right to freely chosen gainful work, and any legislation that targets men who pay for sex will leave prostitutes particularly vulnerable to violence and abuse, the document claims. It also says countries should support the right of prostitutes to freedom of association, thought to refer to groups of prostitutes setting up brothels. Human rights principles require policymakers to value the voices of those who are directly affected by inequality and discrimination. An Amnesty spokesperson told Radio VR that they are aware that this is a very sensitive issue, and that's why they're canvassing opinion and encouraging discussion with their members around the world. The human rights organisation confirmed that the document had been leaked in draft form before its official release date, and that it is unfinished and needed to be revised in some areas. So we decided to discuss and debate the legalisation of prostitution and if paying for sex is a human right on Radio VR. I'm joined in the studio by Charlie Daniels, who's a sex worker and author of Priceless, My Journey Through a Life of Vice. Also taking part is sex law expert Dr. Belinda Brooks-Gordon from the University of London and author of The Price of Sex, Prostitution, Policy and Society. And columnist Mary Dejevsky, who supports legalisation and suggests prostitution is not going away and is best accommodated. So should brothels and prostitution be legalised, and is paying for sex a human right? So first of all, I'm going to ask you, Mary Dejevsky, why do you think that brothels and prostitution should be legalised?
Having them illegal has exactly the same effect that has from criminalisation of drugs, which is it drives it out of the mainstream, it puts it on the wrong side of the law, something that it's actually going to happen anyway. And it makes people into criminals who wouldn't otherwise be criminals or have a brush with the law. So it creates a whole sort of corner of legality or illegality, which needn't really be there, and I think it's to everybody's disadvantage.
Belinda Brooks, Dr. Brooks-Gordon, then, it's either the paying for or buying or selling. Which side should be decriminalised or criminalised?
Well, Mary is absolutely correct, because prohibition just criminalises otherwise law-abiding people. It shoves things underground and it opens the doors to the traffickers, to the violent people. It makes sex workers, when they have to work on their own, if we made any other kind of group of people work on their own, like hairdressers or barbers, they would be subject to violence and stigmatisation. So Mary's absolutely correct. It's really nice to have the kind of debate where we can discuss the issues without a big, a for or against argument, because this is a really serious issue. And so often people get over emotional about it, and yet we need cool heads, we need evidence-based policy, and all the evidence points to decriminalisation, where it's been very, very safe in New Zealand and very well documented. We don't need false morality and hate against sex working women. And all credit to Charlie, because there is still a stigma, having previously been in the sex industry, for her to come on and speak on the issue. So I'm delighted to be talking with these two women today.
Well, I think that brings me very nicely then on to you, Charlie, who, in response then to what Mary Dejevsky and Dr. Belinda Brooks-Gordon have said, where would you like to see this debate going?
Nothing that anybody said so far has given me a negative reaction, and I'm totally on board with what Belinda's just said about, finally, some kind of discussion that doesn't involve, are you pro this or pro that? Because I'm afraid I'm just strictly a pro. And I'm actually a current sex worker. I returned to the industry a couple of years ago, and I've worked all over the world. And here's the thing. I've worked in legal brothels. I've worked in tolerance zones. I have run brothels, and I have worked alone. So I've got a really good overview of all of this. And after 20 years of having the same views as Mary and Belinda, I actually have found out that changing the law doesn't address the serious issues. And that's the problem. There isn't currently a strategy that one can implement, whether it be legalisation or decriminalisation, that actually assists the sex workers, because you can, criminalise the client, which is absolutely ridiculous. That is akin to blaming an undertaker for death, suggesting that the client is the one that actually brings up the problems like trafficking or exploitation. Or you can legalise the business, which gives out the message that prostitution is something that you want your own children to be involved in, and that the unemployment centre should say you do this or you lose your benefits. And I think actually what we need to do is to stop thinking that changing the law changes people's hearts and minds. I get it. If we criminalise it, we push it further underground, we push it back into the shadows, we make women more at risk. But the problem...
that's where I take a bit of issue with Charlie, because I don't think you should make the good the enemy of the best. And while she's completely right, it's not going to solve every single problem, decriminalising. There are other things that you would need to do as well to have a perfect law. For example...
Stop. No, let her speak. Go on, because you just had a word.
But she's totally misread me. I'm not pro-legalisation, decriminalisation or anything.
No, I thought the point you said was that no system is going to be perfect.
Yes, but with regard to changing the law, I think there are other options, and no one ever looks at them. The response to these issues, whether it be a dead street worker or, a brothel that's been full of trafficked girls, is always the same. Which law do we change? Well, I understand it. We want to make women safer. I understand we want to cut out criminalisation. It's important that we don't have exploited girls. But unfortunately, I've found in countries that have a legal system, where I've worked in America, where there's been legal brothels, the underage girls, the addicted girls, the girls with antisocial behavioural issues aren't allowed to be involved in the legal system, thereby creating a two-tier system. And that's where the inequality exists in the policy framework.
That will always, sadly, be
exactly.
The case. There will always be a grey market.
Exactly, which is why changing the law isn't the answer. I have another strategy.
It's a step towards, Charlie, it's a step towards, because your argument
would be on this merry-go-round for another 20 years.
Your argument would say, well, just because there are hooky goods on the street, then let's get rid of the designer industry.
No,
fake goods.
Don't put words in my mouth. This is what annoys me about being involved in these sorts of debates. Everybody assumes that because I will not pin my colours to the mast of any of changing those laws, that I have no opinion or I seek to demonise something or someone. This is not the case. Unlike you two ladies, forgive me for saying, I have worked at every level of this industry. I've worked on the streets, I've worked in brothels, I've owned and ran brothels, and I have worked as a high-class escort. I'm not talking about theories that come from reading academic books, no disrespect. I'm not talking about...
because you don't know my research. I spent a year with the Vice Squad at Charing Cross.
Actually, you're wrong. I've read your research, but thanks again for making an assumption.
Let's not make assumptions about
And you're
each
all
other.
about street work. Again, another bias, another individual who sees it all through the eyes of street work, and there is more to the sex industry than that.
But we have here...
I mean, I'm sorry, I don't think... I don't think that these two things are going at cross purposes. I don't accept that changing the law or decriminalising will actually stop the abuses, the difficulties, the cruelties, all the things that go together with illegal prostitution. I think when I wrote about this, I said that you're still going to have, as has been said, you're still going to have the street aspect. Even if you legalise, you're going to have this grey market or this black market. What you do have, though, is that to an extent you have a choice. And you have a section of the sex market which is taken out of that degeneracy. And I think if that happens, that is actually better. It's not wonderful, but it's better. Then you turn to the other reasons, which are the reasons why people go into prostitution. And one of them is, I know this is an unpopular view, but for quite a few people, it is a rational choice because it pays a lot more money for a lot less effort than a whole load of other jobs which may be available to women.
No.
That's the first thing. The second thing is that the other reasons are often to do with drugs or to do with needing money, which is way beyond the earning power of these women. And so you can say that they're forced into prostitution, but it's not going to help. You can legalize drugs. That may make one difference at that end of the market, but no one thing, I think, is going to eradicate what I would actually say.
There is one thing, actually.
Legalize it.
There is one thing, and this is what you're all missing. It's what the government have been missing, it's what the politicians have missing, it's what the media are missing, and nobody's been letting me say this for 20 years.
Which is?
My strategy is positive intervention with young people in care. 90% of those who have been involved in street-based sex work, 90% of them have spent some time in care. The problem with my strategy is it's not a vote winner. It's a long-term strategy.
Actually, Charlie, that was in the government, the coalition government had that in their violence strategy in 2011, mainstreaming safety, taking violence against sex workers as a hate crime and focusing on the grooming of young children in care. Now, you're wrong, it's not 90%, that figure's wrong. However, there are many, and that's the problem with criminalisation.
And that's the problem with statistics. I'm using the one used by the Centre of Social Study, and everybody's got their own statistic on it, but it gets the point across. I am a former child of care.
We're focusing on this, and it is a huge, very important
The government
issue.
aren't focusing on this. Can I just say to you that they've got all the words in place. They aren't focusing on this. They talk a good talk, but I've never actually, all right, I'll rephrase this. I have been into children's homes and I have worked with people in social services. I have talked to Secure Unit and funding is being drastically cut. They wanted to get people like me involved in talking to people about why, for example, what the impact of sex work is on a person's psyche, let alone the horrendous things that can happen to you. But unfortunately, all of that has stopped because of a lack of funding. And with all due respect, you and a lot of the academics come through the door of you see the sex work on the streets. And I totally respect that. One of the reasons I'm so fired up is because I worked on the streets and I know so many dead girls. I've sat on the trials of these girls. I don't want to see women on the streets at all. I'm on side with you on that. But
we're not too far apart on that issue because, like you, I attend a lot of trials. And one of the things that we do know was that there was a very good pilot in Liverpool. And there have been a huge number of murders in this country, and people argue that tolerance zones don't work. One single murder in Holland, and yet by any other baseline harm reduction measure, if we had 90 murders in the same decade.
I know, but can I just say something to you? Just one thing.
Yeah.
And this is my honest opinion. Why on earth would we tolerate? Why would we tolerate clients who go onto the streets? And hear me out before you start shouting at me, because I can understand why that would make you angry, because I know what you're going to say in response to this, more or less, because I said it myself for 20 years, I admit it. The problem is that the clients on the streets invariably are from the same demographic, and also, sadly, are the ones that want the exploited women, the girls that are underage, the girls that are on drugs, to have bareback sex, that sort of thing. And in a small minority of cases are serial killers. So unfortunately, what we're actually doing is saying that we are going to set up a framework that's going to cost millions of pounds, I believe, of taxpayers' money that no one's going to support, when in actual fact, I don't think we should be looking at tolerance zones at all. That's my honest opinion. I looked at this for nearly 20 years and I just think, all right, we can't look at legalising brothels in comparison either, because you get the two-tier system. But to me, why aren't we looking at preventing women from going into this? Why aren't we looking at the what I call the core root level issues? Homelessness, addiction, preventing offending.
Should two consenting adults wish to exchange money for sex, then that is up to them.
I agree. I don't, of course I agree. I believe my client should pay.
Mary Judowski.
I think there's two separate things here. Yes, decriminalising, allowing people who want to exchange money for sex. I have absolutely no problem with that. I do have a problem with the circumstances in which that happens, and I think that legalisation would actually make it would at least sanitise one section of that market. Now, if we go to the other the other thing that has been introduced as the answer to the problem, especially of street prostitution. On the one hand, tolerance zones. I actually disagree with the idea of tolerance zones. I think you need to have properly run, properly regulated brothels, something like Germany or
Street girls can't work in brothels. Street girls can't work in brothels.
No, exactly. This is why I want to. This is why exactly why I want to come on to your main point, which is about the care system. And I think it's not just prostitution that's wrong with the care system. The care system in the UK is an absolute catastrophe.
Agreed.
Huge proportion of the people who have brushes with the law, who are engaged in long-term criminality.
Mary, that's what I'm saying. That's what my campaign is.
Who can't read or write.
Yeah.
All the people who were involved in the recent cases of grooming for sex. In places where children's homes had
Mary, forgive me for saying
out of big cities. Now,
this is what my campaign is. It's called Preventing Offending, and it works predominantly with children in care.
But it's not just about prostitution.
I'm not just about prostitution. I actually talk about preventing offending.
Stop. Let Mary continue.
The care system is something that needs to have a huge focus on it, and I think that one of the results of these series of cases that have been around the country, including I think there was a big one in Oxford, there were ones in Liverpool, there were ones in near Birmingham. Strangely, most of these cases have not been in London because the children's homes have been, as it were, devolved out of the capital to save money. So where there have been these concentrations of children, or at least juveniles in care, then you've had the concentration of these problems. I think the more of these cases that have come to court, the more shocking it's been to realise that this is a phenomenon, and it's quite a widespread phenomenon. And that that the care system is to blame. So I actually disagree that the focus has been taken off the care system. I think it's going back onto the care system, and maybe if this were given a push...
It hasn't, though. The funds have been taken away. The funding isn't there for the prevention work.
The focus of the care system
run
by local authorities in the UK has been pushed to the focus. Has been pushed to the fore again with recent high-profile cases involving those girls that have been trafficked and groomed around the country.
Hands up.
And the media has a responsibility for helping push that to the fore.
Okay, so we're all agreed that the care system is not fit for purpose. We're all agreed that young people in care are vulnerable. A statistic that might or might not be right, I don't know, 60 times more likely to be involved in homelessness, prostitution, crime, drug addiction, etc. But the problem is that although everybody's talking about it, nobody is doing the prevention work. And in my humble opinion, you know, at the end of the day, instead of spending another 20 years fighting against the feminists who will never want legalisation of prostitutes, fighting against, you know, the religious zealots who've got their own agenda, fighting against this person who wants it legalised, that person who doesn't, is a waste of time. Let's put our time and energy into positive intervention with young girls particularly, and some young vulnerable boys in the care system. And this isn't just about prostitution, this is about preventing offending. This is about, you know, making sure they don't end up homeless, making sure that they know what antisocial behavioural looks like, making sure they understand what exploitation is. That in itself is a long-term strategy. In many years to come, if it is looked at properly, will actually reduce the number of people vulnerable on the street.
How do you run an early intervention programme with children in care to educate them about not being forced or not being coerced into prostitution?
I'll tell you how you don't do it. You don't do it through people who've studied at university on criminology. You don't do it through social workers. You don't do it even in the way that I'm delivering now, projecting information. That's how you don't do it. I agree with that. So I'm not even proposing myself as a candidate for this. But what I am saying is that I recognise that, for example, let me give you a little thing. When I was in care, I thought that I was in the passenger seat of my own life the whole time. I was never in the driving seat. So every opportunity I'd snatched the wheel and take the car off course. Someone got in the back of that car one day and said to me, I know what you can do. I know how you can take control of your life. I know how you can have autonomy. I'll sit in the back and just give you a few guidelines. And that person was someone who put me on the game. And I listened to them. And that's called grooming. And it wasn't until I'd read a book by a lady called Jenny Pierce at 30 years old that I could actually acknowledge something I'd been denying to the press for years, that actually I had been groomed. I'd written an entire best-selling book, got into the Sunday Times list, sat there in front of hundreds of people, because I'm a brave and confident gobby lady, and said, I'm in control of my body, without realising the manipulation. And if I didn't realise it as an intelligent woman, then how on earth were kids in care going to spot it? And it will take someone like me to give information to maybe somebody who's got a better strategy, and to come together with an organisation and a framework to show, what does exploitation look like? What does a healthy relationship look like? What is it like to feel priceless? Because the true tragedy for me is I wrote a book called Being Priceless or Priceless, and I never got to feel it. It might as well have been called Priceless.
Can I come in here?
Yes, please, Mary Javesky.
I think that a focus on the care system is hugely desirable because it's the source of so many things that are wrong with society in Britain. But I don't think that even that is going to be the total solution to getting women off the streets, because that problem predates the iniquities of the British care system by centuries. And so I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, actually...
So I think that legalisation, I think legalised brothels, regulation, health checks, all these sort of things, I think that is going to help. It's not going to solve the problem. It's going to help. I think a new attitude to drugs, treating it as we used to treat it, as a medical problem rather than a legal problem, I think that may also help. But I think in the end,
nobody should have to sell sex.
Universal, eternal phenomena that we can only do a limited amount about.
Have to sell sex in order to get drugs.
Let me ask a question. It's all sort of linked, but it goes with a lot what you were saying about the intervention and the education. And obviously, recently, the government voted not to put sex and relationship education as standard in the national curriculum, which campaigners against violence against women and some rape crisis centres say there's a real step back, that actually schools it's not compulsory for them to teach not just the basics about sex and procreation, but about the wider issues that are faced in society, which does seem that, in terms of what the government are doing, it is a step back. And actually this sex and relationship advice in schools would be one way of taking on your method. It does
help build healthy relationships. Certainly my children had good PSHE instruction in schools, but
it's more than that.
It's something for all the policymakers.
Coming back to something that Mary said and Belinda jumped on, is this whole idea that and I get it, but I'm going to twist this a bit. I want you to think about this, ladies, that this care system issue actually predates. What if we don't call it a care system issue? What if we call it a disconnection issue? Because that's what these young people in care have got, that they are emotionally and physically disconnected from society. This is why they want to drive their own car, if you like, and be in the steering wheel of their own lives. This is a disconnection issue. So actually, although it does predate the care system, going back to what Rebecca has actually just said is interesting, because what we'd have to look at is the pastoral caring relationships, and we'd have to look at what does self-esteem look like, and how having low self-esteem but very high confidence levels can make a woman very vulnerable. I wore that mask because I thought I was ugly, So I put it about, hoping to either win love or friendship or anything, and in the end won money, and thought, God, I've got some validation finally. And it took me years to realise that was unhealthy, and I was already trapped then, and I'm to some degree trapped now by believing that what I've got between my legs is probably far more valuable than between my ears, and that's a sad state of affairs. And I know that that's not the truth, but you get locked into this. So whilst I agree, yes, it predates the care system, it's the old story, and that's why this is the oldest profession in the world, that women, need to have the support to understand certain issues about self-esteem, certain issues about exploitation.
No, the one thing the government has done is put a lot more money into talking therapies and what have you. And you're right about the money going out of the care system. That is the problem when you have a criminalised model, because all of the police will go after the low-hanging fruit, and it's terribly easy for them just to turn over brothels or turn over ordinary punters instead of focusing on violence against sex workers, those in the care system, kids trafficked for cannabis production and what have you. There have been a huge number of problems because the police have just focused on criminalising, and that's highly problematic. I don't know why the last government brought those laws in, because certainly when somebody called Catherine Raymond was an advisor to Tony Blair, they did a forensic analysis and they said that legalisation was the best way forward.
But Belinda, the world's moved on, and what a lot of people don't know about is there's a massive internet portal, I bet you know about it, called Adult Work. And I'm not advertising it because it's the only one on the internet where there are literally hundreds of thousands of women. Now, a small minority, and believe me, it is, because I can tell a traffic woman from a mile away, but a small minority of women on there are working under circumstances which I'd like to see different, but the vast majority of these are single women who work privately from home. Actually, I'd rather see that. I'd rather, which wouldn't involve changing the law, because as both you educated ladies know, it's not illegal for a woman to work alone from home. Yes, it puts her at risk, and perhaps there are ways we can address that. But I ran brothels, and for years wanted them legalised. But if I'm completely honest, I think it's fantastic that the internet has made it possible, particularly on a website that's often frowned upon. But in my experience, and today, offers me an insight, because it has feedback on the client, a bit like eBay. No one's saying them systems, a bit like Mary, are 100% proof, because they're not. And you still get fake things and whatever, and you've got to be a bit savvy. But if a woman is insisting on doing this, I think it is better if she does it privately in her own home. And then we try and find a way to keep her safe within that, because nobody wants a brothel on their doorstep. Nobody wants to tell their kids or the employment centre to say this is acceptable. So instead of trying to pick a camp, why don't we look at something that's already working, women working from home, make that a little bit safer, and put to one side the whole brothel thing.
In 2006, the last government did have in their prostitution strategy the facility for 2 or 3 women to work together. Fiona McTaggart was the minister that brought that. I remember through.
Fiona.
However, and then sadly, either she lost confidence or the radical separatist feminist lobby got to her.
That's not the point.
Very powerful, small but powerful lobby got to her, and they pulled that out of the law.
Yeah, but you see, I think that we should just be looking at making women safer, working from home, and as for the streets and the brothels, leave them alone.
The thing is that what happens sometimes with legalisation, you end up with corporatism, like in Nevada. So I think that's what you're talking about.
Excuse me, I've worked in Nevada. I've worked in 2 brothels in Nevada. Do you know what happens? I end up giving 50% to some bloke.
Corporate brothels. And there are ways.
They're horrible.
It doesn't have to be either or. You can look at all of the things. You can look at the policy in the round and have.
Do you know what it's like to sell yourself in a brothel? Do you know what? I worked in one brothel in Australia where I was lined up against a wall, and the only thing that I could do was stand there and say, "Hello, I'm Chrissy. I'm from England," and I was judged completely and utterly as an object. Now, if we're going to talk...
That's what I'm saying. Some of those large corporates, I'm in favour of empowering women so that they have that choice and that autonomy over their working lives.
Women should work for themselves, not for other people.
Having to work for these huge businesses, and that's one of the problems with the situation in Nevada.
OK, sadly, we are approaching the end, and I think I'm going to end with a comment from Mary Dejewski. Mary, going back to what you suggested with working in the care system, or what you then said, shouldn't we call the disconnection system? Mary did agree with this. So, Mary, if everyone's OK, I'm going to give the final word to you.
Yes, I mean, I think that there's a whole lot of things that can be done to improve the situation as it is at the moment. It is possible to take more women off the streets. I agree that the internet has had a facilitating effect and has probably improved things for some people. But I think decriminalising should be used along with, obviously, education and all these things. But we have to recognise that prostitution is a problem that is older than any of these, and I don't think that it's going to go away. The only thing we can do is to hope to improve things a bit.
Criminalisation does not work, and that, intolerant authoritarianism doesn't work, and measures can be made to improve.
On that note, I'd really like to thank all my guests. Charlie Daniels, who's a sex worker and author of Priceless, My Journey Through a Life of Vice, sex law expert Dr. Belinda Brooks-Gordon from the University of London, and columnist Mary Dejewski.